So the next talk that we're going to have is going to be all about how do you think about evolving your recruitment strategy from one that is more tactical to the full end of what's possible in a strategic recruiting practice. And I'm very pleased that I'm going to be able to share the stage with Kara Yarnot. I've known Kara for a very long time. She was the vice president of talent acquisition at SAIC. And based on my memory, one of the most innovative clients that we've worked with in terms of trying new things, becoming proactive, and really leading the charge in her organization. And what's inspiring to me about Kara's story at SAIC is that it didn't start that way. The early days of our relationship were very much like an organization that was just figuring out how to adopt a more strategic style. And under Kara's leadership and her team, we saw her make tremendous progress. And so since that time, Kara has now become a consultant to organizations as the president and founder of Meritage Consulting, where she helps other companies evolve their recruiting strategy to something that is for the next generation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a framework that we've adopted at LinkedIn to help define what it truly means to be strategic as a talent acquisition organization and what steps companies can take along the way to make that happen. But I think it all starts, as Parker said, oftentimes quotes just bring concepts to life, and this one stood out for me. And nothing we do is more important than hiring and developing people. And like all great things that we want to achieve as organizations, unless we measure them, we can't manage them. And what we found is that to date, there's never been a great report card or framework for how you know where you stand in the spectrum of talent acquisition strategies. On one end, you have traditional talent acquisition strategy, and on the other end, you have much more strategic. And on the strategic side, think about the role that talent acquisition can play as having a seat at the executive table, about bringing data and insights to drive the strategy of the company, about being proactive, about getting the candidates that you need not just today, but building the pipeline for tomorrow, and building a brand that establishes the organization as a place where the best and brightest want to work and want to take their careers. And what we've found is that companies that adopt this style have a completely different role that they play in their organization. They're not just a means to fill roles. They're a competitive advantage relative to their competitors in the market. Talent acquisition becomes a way that the company wins, not just a way that the company keeps moving forward. And that's very different than a way that a lot of organizations start. Historically, many talent acquisition organizations have thought about themselves as reactive to the needs of the business. The business needs a role here. My goal is to fill it as cheaply and as quickly as I can. It's a very reactive model. And we need to get out of that mindset because that's not a winning strategy. That's not a way that talent acquisition becomes the way that you thrive. And that sounds nice, and there are steps along the way, but what we've tried to do is make that practical. We've tried to turn this idea of a gradation between traditional and strategic and turn it into a series of building blocks that we all can look at and assess ourselves and decide where we want to focus. There are actually 4 different dimensions to, in our mind, building a great talent acquisition strategy: sourcing, jobs, brand, and metrics. And each of these elements has its own range between traditional and strategic. And my guess is for many of you, when you see the detail on here, you'll realize that on some of these dimensions, you're performing fantastically. And in others, you have a long way to go. And for some of you, one part of this strategy may be the most important, and others may be less important. But let's turn this conversation of evolving our strategy from something theoretical to something very practical. Let's decide what parts of our playbook we want to take to become truly next level and where we want to invest our time. And so to talk about that, I'm excited to bring Kara up on stage to share her experiences working with organizations to make these kinds of transitions, both in her work at SAIC and in her recent consulting experience. So Kara, come on up. Is this you?
Yeah, I want to go back.
Great.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dan. And thanks again to LinkedIn for inviting me to participate. They're actually handing out on your tables copies of this roadmap so you can follow along and have something to take away. And really my goal with you today is, Parker mentioned we need to have goals. My goal today is for you to understand a few steps that you can take to move along the roadmap. I'm a big fan of the roadmap with LinkedIn. This is the third time I've had a chance to speak about it. And as I look back as where I was at my journey at the SAIC, now 8 years ago, I was there for 7 years. I think in many cases I was way off to the left, even before traditional and some of the challenges that we had. Dan made a really good point that you may be in very different places on the roadmap in each of the 4 dimensions, and that's important to know that that's okay. And you really want to assess that and take a look at that. But my goal here today is kind of walk you through some examples of things that you can do to move along the roadmap in each of the dimensions. Before you can even start doing that, what my experience has shown in my 7 years at SAIC, prior to that I had led recruiting programs at Boeing and actually in the home building and construction industry, which was its own challenge. And then with some of my small to medium sized businesses that are clients of mine today, there's some really interesting stories in there too. But before you can get started, the first thing you really need to focus on is getting executive buy-in. Senior leaders in your company that believe in the value in moving to a strategic approach to talent acquisition. How many of you have leaders who have a quote similar to the one that was up there? Talent is our most important asset. It is our competitive advantage. Great, a lot of you. How many of those same leaders actually take actions that align with that? A few, very good. Others have challenges in that piece. So you can, as a talent acquisition leader, you can help your senior executives understand what it takes to move along and help them create some actions to do that as well. But you really have to kind of get some people on board to start with. And there's a number of people you should look at inside your organization to be those executive sponsors, executive trustees, so to speak, of your journey. For me at SAIC, I was very fortunate in having an executive VP of HR who did get it and was very open to my new ideas and a lot of the piloting and crazy things that I tried and sometimes failed. And so I had that as an advantage, and I hope many of you do too. But there are other ways to find key executives. One of the first things is to really understand where your executives are coming from. At SAIC, it was a company of engineers and scientists, so they wanted data. They didn't care about my anecdotal stories of why brand was great. They wanted data. So that was one of the things I had to teach myself to do, was lead all of those conversations with data. So think about your leaders and what is most important to them in their decision making and frame your conversation that way. One of the most fun ways I got somebody on board was identifying kind of a personality trait. I had a very senior leader who was probably the most competitive person I'd ever met in my life. He would time people, be like, let's see who can get to the bathroom and back fastest during the break. I mean, this guy was crazy in a lot of instances, but he wanted to beat everybody, and he wanted to beat everybody at everything. So I capitalized on that, and I'm glad Dan showed in the keynote earlier the talent flows chart that you can get from your relationship manager that shows of your competitors, how you lose people to them and who you're stealing people from. This man loved this chart. He's like, well, what do we need to do steal from this company? And what do we need to do to steal from that company? So I would show him that on a regular basis. And I would also show him just the general statistics from LinkedIn about what % of our competitors' employees were on LinkedIn. So he started to say, oh, well, if they're there, we should be there. We should be reaching out to them. We should be building our brand. And so I really tapped into his competitive juices in a lot of ways. I have a current client who has a really great strategy. She is really at a very traditional firm. People want to do things the old ways. There's still, at times, advertising in the local newspaper for senior level civil engineer positions. I'm pretty sure these people are not reading the local newspaper for civil engineering senior positions. So she got really smart. And she had a external hire at kind of maybe 2 levels below the CEO, who came in from a company that she knew was very strategic in their talent acquisition. She's the head of HR, so she had access to who these people were. So she created that person as an ally. She started talking to him about what it is they did at their other firm. She started telling him about her ideas for things they could do from a talent acquisition standpoint, and he got really excited. And he's become an internal champion for her and her activities because he will pilot programs for her. You're gonna hear me talk a lot about piloting this morning. He'll pilot programs for her, but more importantly, he sits in executive meetings where she's not always there, and he talks about the things that they're doing that are strategic. So really look across your organization for people that you can tap into to be really good leaders that can help tell your story and support you. One other small one that was really kind of unique, I think, in my experience. One of my biggest champions at SAIC, believe it or not, is a federal government contractor in the defense and intel space, incredibly conservative company in a lot of ways. But one of my biggest champions was our associate general counsel. How many of you think your legal department wants to support all the crazy things that you do? Yeah, so Brian was fantastic. He really got what I was trying to do, and he became a great sounding board. So I would go to him with ideas about ways we would brand the company or changes we'd make to our application process to make it simpler, and get his feedback first before I started championing it throughout the organization. And he would give me ideas of things that I should think about, or he'd point out who in the organization was going to be my biggest roadblock. Throughout my time at SAIC, I really partnered with our associate GC, which is not a place that you normally look for as a partner. So uncover the stones, reach out and see who might be really, really effective for you to help you move you through this journey. So I want to start with sourcing. At the beginning of my time with SAIC, which was in 2006, we had 24 different business units who at the time had 24 different HR departments and 24 different staffing organizations, all who did things very differently. Different staffing managers, and for some of our vendors, believe it or not, we had 24 different contracts. And so we set out to change that, obviously, but we had parts of the organization that did have some sourcing features. I had other parts of the organization that outsourced everything to contingent recruiters and everything in between. And we had the vision to move to team-wide pipelining. And there's a couple of things that we did to do that. First, we really spent time identifying our key talent pipelines, whatever those skill sets are that are most important for your organization. There's a couple of ways you can do this. Does anyone have an actual workforce planning function at their company? Okay, a few of you. These should be good partners of yours to talk through what are those skills for now and the future and what the company's plans are. But most of us probably don't have workforce planning people, or it's a concept that is a great idea in our HR departments, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So you need to do a lot of your own investigation in this way. You naturally know what are the skills in greatest demand, you're running the department, but really start talking to some of your senior leaders about where they see the business going. What are those skills that are most important? And identify those sets of talent pools. They could be 5, there could be 15, there could be 40, depending on what your company does. SAIC is an example. We were in several lines of business, primarily government contracting, defense space, intel space, but we also had a commercial portion of our business that we were looking to grow. So we had several talent pipelines that were key, but I chose to focus and pilot on just a few. So one that was key for growth for us was healthcare IT. We had been in the industry for a very long time, but weren't really known as an employer. And we really needed people with top-notch IT skills that could apply those and understand how to apply those in the healthcare space. And it's become far more important for the company today as Obamacare and all of those types of activities. One of our very large projects at SAIC was actually to work between the military health system and the VA health system. If any of you are military folks or have military in your family, you know that when you leave military service and transition to the VA, that all of your medical history is essentially lost. So we were working on the project to actually connect those two systems. So we needed a lot of highly skilled individuals. And another key talent pool for us were intelligence analysts. We did a lot of work for top secret security, clearance required parts of the government, and we had skills that we needed there. Two very, very different spaces, very, very different talent pools. We also had probably at the time identified about 16 or 17 key talent pools. Business development was one of them. HR was actually one of them at the time. But we chose a few to pilot because you can't boil the ocean in a lot of ways, particularly when you're trying to get people to think about things differently. So we went very small, and I actually started with the intel analysts. And at any given time, we probably had 10 recruiters working on Intel analyst positions, averaging about 40 to 50 recs apiece. And we made the controversial decision to pull 2 of those recruiters into full-time sourcing roles. So they no longer had a rec load. Great chaos ensued, as you can imagine, because their rec load had to go to somebody else. And then you have the full life cycle recruiters very frustrated, and you need time to make a sourcing model work. So you need to have patience in a lot of ways in order to get through a lot of these things. So really piloting, and most importantly, measuring. And what we did here was we looked at some very traditional recruitment metrics. Not necessarily my favorite, but it's what we had access to at the time. What was our time to fill on Intel analysts? What was our cost per hire on Intel analysts? And really looking at how often we were using external agencies. And so we went for the first quarter of having these 2 individuals focus exclusively on finding talent, engaging that talent, and keeping them warm for when we had positions that were open that met their requirements and needs. And it took us through that first quarter of kicking and screaming from the recruiters, from the hiring managers, not necessarily understanding, but we came out on the other end with a decreased time to fill and a decreased cost per hire. And then we started to have a business case to share. So I could circle back, pick another talent pool to start with. This time it was healthcare IT, really went to the other side of the spectrum and started a pilot there. And what's interesting is we didn't really see quite the same results with that pipeline as I saw with Intel analysts. And I didn't know what to expect, what not to expect, but what we came to learn is that really in that space we had a lot of branding that we needed to do before we could really source and keep people warm and keep them interested in our opportunities. So as much as I would like to say we got to full team-wide pipelining, we really didn't. We got part of the way there. Probably ended up with, when I left the company last year, our defense and intel space was fully ingrained in all of their positions. We're in a sourcing model. Our engineering and life sciences place had a little bit of sourcing, but healthcare IT really still stuck with the full life cycle recruiting, and that really worked for them. So it really based on what worked for the business and what our data was telling us. And so we kept going back and forth. Any of you are familiar with the defense contracting industry, the company actually split in 2 last year, so things have changed drastically for them, and I know parts of the company are using this model now, and one part of the company is not. So moving on to jobs. And jobs can be very challenging. How many of you feel like you're still in kind of a post and pray method in some areas? Okay, good, of just a few. This I call post and pray is beyond just post and pray. It's waiting for the stars to align. Because at the time you actually know you have a specific position open and you put it up on wherever it is you decide to put it up, you're hoping that the people or persons with the right skills are looking in those places at that very moment in time, are in a part of their career where, hey, they're going to be interested in at least entertaining what these opportunities might be, and oh, lo and behold, they're actually willing to go through your 47-step application process at that point in time. So not really all that effective. There may be some roles in your company where that still works, but really moving towards full segmentation of what you're doing and full prioritization is really where you're looking to go. And one of the first things that you need to do is identify the sources that are most effective for each of your talent pipelines. So if you go back to how you segmented your work and you look for us, I'll use intelligence analysts as an example again. We looked at our data. We looked at our source data and said, where were we getting the highest quality sources for these specific jobs? And we realized it was probably 2 of the 10 places we were traditionally posting those jobs. So why would we continue posting at the other 8? So we ran a pilot. We took those other 8 out. We increased our investment in the 2 that were bringing us good quality, and investment beyond just posting the jobs, but engaging with those candidates and building true pipelines, and then continued to measure what's happening here. Are we impacting our general metrics or not? So really taking a look at what sources work best for you. This is also a way where you can engage with your LinkedIn relationship manager. They can tell you how many people on LinkedIn have the profiles that you're after. And this was really key for us with healthcare IT. We engaged with our relationship manager. We found out that there were thousands of people who had the skill set we were interested in on LinkedIn, but had no awareness of us as a company. So we knew that that was something we were going to need to work into our brand strategy in order to engage those folks. And I'll talk about that in brand as well. But really picking those sources and having a segmented approach by your key pipeline is really the most important part. And then truly engaging those folks so that you can get to that level. Because in the ideal world, at the point you know you have to fill a position right away, you want to have a ready-made group of candidates that you can pick from. That's what the utopia we're all looking for, and you can work through this by fully engaging those folks. I was fortunate at SAIC that we had a talent community tool. We had actually used Jobs to Web at the time that allowed us to reach out to those candidates that had those profiles, send them regular updates, encourage them to continue to follow the company and learn more about what it was that we were doing. And that was really, really helpful. If you don't have a tool like that, because they're not cheap, I know, there are things that you can do. Your recruiters who are focused in those areas can keep their, however they use it. If you're using LinkedIn Recruiter, can put them all in a project and regularly communicate with those folks. Just give them updates on what's going on with the company, a great new product launch, just keeping them warm so that when you do post a job in your key locations, you can direct all of those people to take a look at that specific position, and you don't have to worry about getting too much excess noise in your pipeline. Brand. This is my favorite part. And I could probably talk about this for a very long time. And a lot of the partnership that I had at SAIC with LinkedIn really helped us build this brand. So a little bit about the brand journey. When I joined the company in 2006, the company was about 40 years old, SAIC was at that time. Until about 5 years before that, we didn't even put our name on our buildings. So talk about no brand. Our founder didn't believe that we should be advertising who we are because our clients, mostly intelligence organizations and the Department of Defense, didn't talk about what they did, so we shouldn't talk about what we did. Well, that's all fine and good and sounds great and fantastic until you're competing for talent with the likes of Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Northrop Grumman, and even though they're not consumer products, so to speak, they do a lot of advertising, their names that people know. It was a very big challenge. My predecessor, when I came on in 2006 as her deputy, she had just launched the first ever talent brand program that was revolutionary for the company. We didn't have an external marketing department, period. This was just not a concept. So we were making it up as we go. Out-of-home activities, we actually bought space on the back of the buses in the DC metropolitan area that, clog up your traffic on a regular basis to do some of our advertising. And we got partnered with the IT team to truly measure what was the traffic coming to our career site, and that was really, really important. So we went from there in 2006 to when I left the company shortly before the split in 2013, where I'm extremely proud to say the Talent Brand Index that Dan talked about earlier, we were actually blowing all of our talent competitors out of the water on the LinkedIn Talent Brand Index, and I'm pretty sure that most of you here on this coast that if you don't know of SAIC would be completely surprised, but we really made huge strides in 7 years. So there's a very important point for all of you. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. It's small steps, building the partnerships, making that happen. So if you're really starting from the beginning on your brand strategy, you first even have to know what on earth is the message we want to portray. How many of you have a talent brand defined for your company? You know what that is. Okay, and how many of you are starting and you need to understand what that is? Okay, so about half and half, which is good. So you need to understand, what does it mean to work at your company? What does it mean to be a candidate for your company? And whether you believe it or not, you have a brand, whether you're marketing around it or not, because people are talking about you as an employer, either to their friends, to their coworkers, on social media, wherever it might be. There's some really easy things that you can do, and we did this at SAIC with defining brand, is we did focus groups of employees and asked them simple questions like, why do you work here? Why do you stay? Why do you keep coming back? We'd focus on new hires. Why did you join? We'd focus on our most tenured employees. Why are you still here? So, and just started gathering information, more open-ended questions. We eventually moved to doing some surveys of our candidates to get some additional information from them. But we came up with actually an overarching theme that while we've changed the messaging around the brand over the years, the overarching theme was people worked at SAIC because they felt like they were making a difference in the world. whether it was as an intel analyst protecting US assets overseas, or the warfighter bringing our men and women home from battle in a safe manner, or the people in healthcare IT that were really helping join health records and keeping people healthy and safe wherever they were in the world. And so people really felt pretty strongly that that was why they worked. So we ran with that, which was, we went through smart people solving hard problems was a brand that I wasn't that fond of, but that we used for a while, but we defined it. And then we had to build partnerships. Now, I had mentioned we didn't even have a marketing department. So imagine in 2007, where we're sitting in talent acquisition, we just started up the company Facebook page. We started up the company LinkedIn page. We started tweeting things all over the place, and nobody really knew what we were doing. It was I'm much more of a beg for forgiveness than ask permission kind of person, and it worked well for a period of time until the company decided they wanted to, have some ownership over this from a customer base, from a B2B marketing standpoint. So we really needed to partner with our marketing and communications department, and as they were further evolving what they wanted the company to be known as to our customers, we needed to evolve our brand message in line with that. So building that partnership was very important. Building partnership with the individuals that run our website, the company's website, very key people, because they have a lot of data, which is really good. And back to my senior leaders love to know data. We're able to start tracking things and convincing people that our talent brand was wildly important. Now, we were not a consumer brand, and those of you that are probably have a little bit different data, but what we were discovering as I partnered with IT was that 60% of the traffic to the company's website was going to the careers page. So that's why the majority of people were coming to our website at all, was to learn about career opportunities. And this was before we were doing a whole lot of recruitment advertising in any way. That data alone was incredibly powerful because people realized, oh, that's who is looking at our website. That's what people are interested in. They want to know more about working here. So we need to put investment into that space. So that, and tracking that across time, and as we did campaigns and drove people to our career site looking for the spikes, the peaks and valleys in the data to see what was being successful. But that partnership with IT really grew. I would have the web manager call me and say, did you see we had a 4% spike overnight? What did you guys do? And we go back and say, oh, we ran some follow company ads on LinkedIn, we had a campaign on Twitter, whatever it might be. We were able to track that very closely. And then he started giving me ideas of things that we could look at because his expertise was in web traffic and social media and SEO and all of those things. And so we really were able to build a good partnership. And then lastly, and really most importantly in brand, in my opinion, is clearly identifying goals. Because when you go to executives and say, we need to work on brand, to a lot of them it feels very fluffy. And it feels like, oh, there's Kara, the HR person again, coming up with her great new ideas. They need to understand what it is that you're doing. And I didn't get this right away, the mistake that I made along the way. And it all became clear to me when I had a senior executive walk into my office one day and say, hey, Kara, I was out on Twitter, or excuse me, I think he called it the Twitter. I was out on the Twitter, and I saw this tweet the other day about how great it is to work at SAIC. I said, okay, great, did you follow it? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But he said, but can you tell me how many hires I'm gonna get from that tweet? And I really tried hard not to laugh out loud. And it was like, oh, that's what he thinks this is all about. He thinks a tweet should lead to a specific hire and I should be able to trace that back. I was like, oh no wonder I'm fighting an uphill battle. No wonder I feel like I'm giving the same presentation and telling the same stories 40 times to the same group of people because I wasn't completely understanding how they were thinking about it. So I stepped back and I said, okay, I need to think about how I present brand very, very differently. And I developed some ideas and they evolved over time, and now they're actually somewhat in line with a lot of what LinkedIn preaches. But I really bucketed into three things what I was doing with brand. Was I trying to build awareness? Was I trying to get engagement? Or was I trying to get people to act? And I started bucketing everything I did around brand in one of those three areas and putting measurements around them. So for example, if I was trying to build awareness, I'll go back to healthcare IT. We had a lot of work going on. We weren't very well known in the space. I needed those people with those skills to be far more aware of us as an employer. So I started thinking, what can we do? And one of the great things it did partnering with LinkedIn is we started using their follow company ads. So we ran a pilot, very short period of time, 2 months I think it was. We said we're going to serve up these follow company ads to people that meet our criteria, who we're looking for, and see if we can get them to follow the company. And in that very short period of time, I had 2,000% increase in followers of the company on LinkedIn that met the criteria for healthcare IT. And these were people that had no idea who we were just 2 months before. So now I had a metric that I could go and take. So when an executive said, what is this follow company ad thing? What are you trying to do? How many hires did it get me? I come back and say, well, the point was not to get hires. The point was to make these people aware. And so I had a metric there. You can use that on your Facebook likes, your Twitter followers, so many of the social media things. That's how you can measure what you're doing in those activities. Because you're never going to get anybody to apply to a job if they don't know who the heck you are. So you got to kind of back that up. So that's awareness. Next thing is engagement. All right, so what they're aware, who cares? You know, are they interested in our opportunities? Are they clicking on our job ads? Are they actually communicating with our recruiters in some way, shape, or form? So we started looking at measurements for engagement and using that same healthcare IT piece. You know, now we had so many people aware, how many could we get to engage with us? And we started looking at measurements of the updates that we did on our LinkedIn company page that were healthcare specific. How many of those were getting shared? That was a metric that we were watching. We were also using our talent community as people had joined the talent community with those healthcare IT skills. How often were they coming back in to learn more about the company? How many of them were opening messages my healthcare recruiters were sending out to them with updates about what the company was doing, a new project win, or a new hire, or a new product that we were putting out? And so we were able to start gathering, okay, how engaged are these people? So again, when somebody comes in my office and says, how many hires did we get from that message to the healthcare people, say, that wasn't the point. I was trying to get them to stay engaged with us and continue to show interest in us as a potential employer and able to show them those metrics. And then finally, action. Action to me and very much to my company was, do we get the right people to apply to the jobs? So when a new position did go up in healthcare IT, not just did we get more applicants, but did we get more quality applicants? And I define quality applicants as people who you would actually want to interview and talk to about the job. So we started to track that. And I could back that all the way up and say, this tweet, Mr. Senior Executive, led to this awareness that then got me this many people who continued to engage. So when it was time to look for people with the right skill and action, I'm able to show you what I was able to do. This was probably the most effective thing I did for brand across the company because I was able to get people to start thinking about it that way and really, really created value. Once I got people understanding that, then I went to the tailored messaging. So I had mentioned that people wanted to work at SAIC because they felt like they were making a difference in the world. Well, for each of our segments, it was a little bit different of a difference in the world, or there was a little bit difference in our brand that was most important to them. So in healthcare IT, we learned they wanted to make a difference in the world, but we were actually offering really unique growth opportunities because the business was growing. So we added that kind of as a sub-bullet just in our healthcare IT advertising. Our intelligence analysts, on the other hand, we weren't necessarily growing at great rates in intelligence analysts' work. There's only so much work the federal government has, and there's like 20 contractors that compete for it consistently, so it's a zero-sum game. But what we offered was on our internal mobility program. So people came to work with us as an intel analyst when the contract they were on was over. Often in federal government contracting, all those people just get laid off. Well, we really put a big effort in finding new homes and reskilling them and retooling them inside the company so they could stay at one place for their career. So we were able to say, you can make a difference in the world and stick around. And so we started to tailor those messages a little bit and then measure awareness, engagement, and action in each of those segments, and then scale it out from LinkedIn to Facebook to the advertising we were doing on the niche intelligence board sites that were very effective for us. So we were able to scale it and be able to continue to go back to what were our goals and how were we achieving them in each of those buckets. And metrics. I don't have any little icons here on metrics because I've been talking about them along the whole way. Really establishing metrics that make the most impact for your company. what really works? Where is engagement necessary? And do you want to have metrics around that? If your company is still desperately focused on time to fill, please read a blog post I wrote on my blog about why that's a bad idea. But otherwise, if that's a metric that you need to focus on, you identify those, establish them, and then put your interventions in an HR term or the activities that you're taking on up against those metrics to really show where you're having an impact and test where you might not be having an impact as well. And then the data-driven decisions, that's where we all ultimately want to go. You're back to what's the right source for specific talent segment. That should be driven by data. Where are you getting your greatest candidates? Not the manager who 5 years ago hired the best candidate ever off of Hot Jobs, which they didn't realize Hot Jobs was gone 5 years ago, but they were still telling you that Hot Jobs is where you needed to be. Really being able to bring that data around and have that seat at the table and really add that value is really most important when it comes to metrics. Okay, so this is all great, but how do you get started? What are you going to do when you leave here today? Most important part. First thing, take your roadmap, identify, circle where you are. Spend some time thinking about where it is that you are in each of those dimensions. You could be in between them. You might be 2.5. You really think about where you are on each of those and where you can have some immediate influence and impact. Find your sponsors, find your champions inside your company. Talk to them about what you're trying to do. Give them examples of what other companies are doing out there and specifically how they can help support you. 1, 2, 3, 10 of these people, as many as you can find, would really be great. And finally, most important part in my opinion, is look at each dimension. You've identified where you are on each dimension, and then write down 2 specific steps you can take today to move you to 1 square to the right, so to speak. So if you're in sourcing and you're all the way to the left and it's still very reactive, start thinking about how to identify my talent pools and what might I be able to pilot. Who are those partners that I could pilot with across the organization? If you're in brand and you haven't yet developed your brand message, start there. I can schedule focus groups. I can talk to my new hires. I can get some great information. Great place to start. 1 small step at a time starts to build from point A to point B and get you ideally all the way to the right-hand side. If anyone gets there, please send me an email. I would love to know. I wasn't quite as successful at SAIC as I would have liked to have been because it is most certainly a journey across time. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions about any of those topics. And I have, yes. The question is, what ideas do I have about the quality metrics? I'm so glad you asked that question. I have a lot of passion around this one. So how many of you measure quality of hire? Is that such a thing at your company? Okay, and that's been kind of the measurement du jour for the last few years in a lot of ways. And quality of hire means something different at each company, whether it's tenure or performance or whatever it might be. And that can be traced back to the source where you got them. While I think that's a good metric, my favorite is one I call quality of candidate. And this is where I think it really helps in your sourcing and your job posting. And how I look at quality of candidate as of the people that apply to a job from a particular source, what % of them do you select for interview? So they meet your qualifications, whatever, if you have online screenings or assessments, and really look at that to say, what's the effectiveness ratio of people coming from that source? And not just because I'm standing on a LinkedIn stage, but I will give you this wildly successful example for us at SAIC. We really looked at, where do all your hires come from? And year over year, our #1 quantity of hires came from Indeed. We got more of everything from Indeed, and I never spent a cent advertising anything on Indeed. So there were always far more people. But when you got to quality of candidate, you would see it took us something upwards of 4,000 Indeed candidates to get 1 interview. When I compared that to what we were doing on LinkedIn, where it was taking me something around 35 LinkedIn candidates to get 1 interview, then I started having a really interesting story to tell. Because what does 4,000 candidates who aren't qualified create for your recruiters? Work. Back to what Parker was talking about. And you really want them looking through all of those people. where if I can have them looking through far fewer candidates that come from a source that's bringing me greater quality, that was when we really started transforming how we thought about segmenting our job postings, when we could look at that kind of quality data. And it really changed the way we did things. One of the things that we were successful at too is once we knew this by key talent pool, in the ATS, we just had the recruiters sort by source, and they looked at the people from our most effective sources first. And so as soon as they found, hey, I'm looking to interview about 4 people, done. They didn't even look at the rest, because they weren't as many effective sources, so it was taking them far less time to get to the next step with the interviews. So that's one that I have a lot of energy around and really proved to be successful for me was the quality of candidate. Question over here?
Yeah, nice presentation.
Thank you.
Question about your talent communities.
Yes.
Were they a Jobs to Web kind of talent network, or did you actually build communities?
That is a fabulous question. I am using the Jobs to Web term of talent community, but it was really a talent network. It was more of a one-way push of information. We weren't really having lots of interaction out there as far as a community standpoint goes. So people were dropping their business card of information, and we were communicating back and forth with them that way, but we weren't really fostering any true community as a vendor like a Talent Circles might do today.
Have you tried it?
I have not. I've seen plenty of demos. I know one of the founders well, but I left before I had a chance to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Conversation was mostly about kind of applicant flow and candidates and all that. But I'm really thinking like the next step, there are people that you hire that are like not only magnets, but they are exponentially more impactful in your company post-hire. Or from a recruiting point of view, do recruiters just not even think about that?
My experience is most recruiters don't necessarily think about that. We didn't get to the point at SAIC where we had a lot of accountability in the talent acquisition area, but I do have a client right now that really is doing some really interesting things along that line, is that at the 3 and 6 month mark, while they're looking at what are people's performance, they're really having people assess what's their impact across the organization, and then they're really tapping into those folks, targeting them for their referral programs. And so that's kind of where they're going from there. They're not necessarily doing anything different from a sourcing standpoint because of that person, but they're using them to help identify that next set of qualified candidates. Over here. Oh, so what did we use? All of our technology across the board? So we were a Taleo customer. We were one of the very last hangers-oners in Verve for as long as we possibly could until Taleo said, under no circumstance may you continue. And so we were a Taleo customer. We had Jobs to Web laid on top of that from a SEO standpoint, a job distribution, and our recruitment marketing overall platform in our talent community, our talent network, to be very clear. So we had that laid on top of there. And then we had our strategic partnerships based on key segment, a huge partnership, honestly, with LinkedIn, with a lot of the activity that we did there. And then we had moved away, fully away from the 2 big major job boards. We didn't post anything there in the last 2 years I was there. Indeed and Simply Hired kind of took care of a lot of that for us in a lot of ways. But we ran our analytics all through Jobs to Web's analytics platform. Yes?
When you were speaking about brand,
Yes.
you'd said you build your brand, engagement, and action. On engagement, how did you measure the social recruitment efforts, like on Twitter, early on, right? Like it sounds like you use Jobs to Web, and they probably can provide you with some of that metric today. But early on, when it was very organic,
Yes.
How did you track and measure engagement on those sources?
So we kind of figured it out as we went along. We had a 25% of one person on my team who was kind of trying to manage our presence on all the social media platforms and not doing as well as we would like. And we were very rudimentary early on, looking at likes and followers, looking at retweets and shares and those types of things, and just tracking them, because those platforms can provide you some pretty basic data on each of your individual things, and that's what kind of got us started. And since we were ahead of the company from a marketing standpoint, they actually started using what we had done the year before as their benchmark for how their tweets should perform. And we ended up with an SAIC company account and an SAIC jobs account because we were getting kind of too mixed in. But we really just used kind of the very early elementary, because we couldn't track a candidate all the way through until we had jobs to web. So it was pretty basic. Anyone? Yes. Oh, microphone's coming up behind you.
Thank you, and great presentation.
Thank you.
With the roadmap that you've outlined here, did you have any pilots or focus around diversity, and could you share a success story around that?
Did we have pilots around diversity? Most certainly. Particularly, one of our big focuses were wounded warriors, because we were a defense contractor, so we had a lot of focus on those individuals who were coming back from serving their country who had a disability of some sort. And we did a lot of marketing and engagement in those areas, and were able to track our general awareness, engagement, and action. And we were really quite happy to see we had awareness in a lot of ways because we were a defense contractor already. A lot of the military folks worked alongside our consultants out there in the field in Afghanistan and Iraq. Engagement was where we started to have some challenges because the things we were pushing out were not necessarily as relevant to those transitioning military members as we had assumed they would be. And so we actually started partnering with our diversity group, a lot of military transition resources. We actually put things up on our career site around for a military person, how to prepare for an interview, and how to talk about their military experiences related to work in the private sector. And so we saw engagement greatly increase when we started sharing that information with the former military members versus some of the just general company updates. They may not necessarily have cared that we hired a new EVP of something or other. And then on the action side, we had a significant increase in applicants after we had that engagement going on. So the wounded warrior military piece was definitely a big success for us. As a defense contractor, we always struggled with, the more traditional diversity categories, women particularly. And one of the things we really tried to do, particularly for women in technology, was highlight we had a female CTO. So we really kind of pushed her out there in social media in a lot of ways and started tracking, particularly with LinkedIn, our followers across technology followers that were women. And I'll be honest with you, we never really saw a huge difference, and we couldn't figure out why, because we felt like we were putting it all in the right place. But we felt like treading water. When I got there 7 years ago, we were 35% women. When I left, we were 35% women. And I mean, sometimes that alone was a achievement. But we definitely had some challenges there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions?
First of all, thank you for sharing your story. It makes it a lot more personal, and certainly we can relate to a lot of the things you talked about, so thanks for that.
You're welcome, thank you.
You talked about developing a talent story, and I think all of us are trying to do that from a macro level. Were you successful developing functional talent stories? And the reason I ask is because you indicated that engagement was different throughout different functions in your organization. So do you have some stories around developing a talent story for a specific function?
It's a great question, and we were somewhat fortunate in that about 4 years ago, the company actually moved its headquarters from San Diego to McLean, Virginia. And with that came the move of major function support organizations, particularly finance. Our entire finance organization, with a few exceptions, were based in San Diego. And I don't know how many of you are from San Diego, but when it said, oh, leave San Diego and move to Washington, D.C., there were not a lot of takers. So we had a huge gap, a huge skill gap to fill in a very short period of time. And this was not an area where we really ever had an uphill battle. Our finance people, we were very well known in San Diego. We had long tenured finance people, and so we had to build a functional story to recruit finance people in a highly competitive area of Washington, D.C., where they may not necessarily have known who we were, thought of us as an employer. They might know who we are because now our names were on the buildings all around the Beltway, but they also called us SAIC. So we had a long way to go. So we really focused in that area, actually brought on a recruiter who specialized in finance. Because it was always, a lot of you, for when finance is the function, it's like, oh, there's a finance opening. Give that to whoever has the smallest rec load right now and just toss it over there. And some of you resemble that remark, which is good to hear. So we started building a lot of those stories. We started getting our CFO, who had relocated from San Diego to McLean, we really went grassroots. We had him out at a lot of the finance functions and organizations. We started targeting a lot of the big four are in the DC area. We started targeting a lot of their finance people. And for a very short period of time, we actually put up a specific career page on LinkedIn for finance professionals that told the story of why it's great to live in DC, what the opportunity was, because we were essentially rebuilding our staff. So the growth opportunities were great. And at that time, we knew the company would be splitting into a finance person. That's really fascinating to go through all of those details. So we did have a pretty good story to tell. And we were able to track followers and engagement through our LinkedIn efforts on finance. But it was really a major company reorg that kind of forced us into doing that, because we didn't really do it a lot with our support functions. One more. Back there.
Thanks for the story.
Sure.
One common theme that clearly ran throughout it was effective engagement with senior leadership is critical. Looking back at your experience, what was the most difficult aspect of engaging senior leadership? And if you were to do it again, what might you do differently to get better engagement?
That's a great question. There are lots of things I would do differently. I would have started with the data, which I didn't do right away. It took me a while to kind of figure out that's what they were looking for. I would have inserted myself in other places. It's fine when there's a meeting about HRE things and the executives are there and they may or may not really be paying attention. It was probably years in before I started having some of my key senior people get invited by some of my allies to meetings like, hey, we're going to bid on this work for these new skills, and we need, or not even new skill, we're going to build on work that needs 25 Ruby on Rails developers in middle of nowhere, Delaware, to start in 30 days. In previous lives, the company would have just bid on that. And then they would have come to recruiting and said, 25 Rubies on Rails that we can pay $65,000 a year, and they're willing to live in the middle of nowhere, Delaware. This stuff definitely went on, and I'm sure you've all experienced it. So getting those people to invite my senior leaders in to start having those conversations and say, everybody back up. Let me bring you some data. I can go to LinkedIn and see how many Ruby on Rails developers there are within 100 miles of Dover, Delaware. Not many, I promise you. And then let's get our comp people involved in salary surveys, and let's start talking about those things so that they can actually be far more strategic about how they're making a business decision. And while I've exaggerated that example a little bit, we actually chose not to bid on the work because ultimately the input that the talent team brought was, oh, we're going to lose money if we actually go after that. So getting some of the people that had those skills embedded a little bit earlier is something I would have really loved to do, but it was based on that kind of talent acquisition executive partnership that we had to build a little bit over time. The other thing I would have done differently is I would have had a lot more patience. And I pride myself on being somewhat patient, persistent person. I'm a distance runner, and if any of you are that, you got to go long ways of boredom at times. But I found myself at times being like, people, I told you the same stuff 3 times last week. Why don't you understand it? And needing to back up and say, let me chunk it out. Let me bring it up in a different setting, not the HRE meeting, but another meeting. Let me bring it up whenever there's an after-hours social event. Just kind of drop some things in there. Hey, did you know competitor XYZ is doing this on social media? We can be doing that too, and it's relatively inexpensive. And really, check out, it's deep in my blog, but I did a post on why getting executive buy-in is like wine tasting. Another one of my favorite things on the earth. But really kind of dripping, when you first take a taste of wine, if you're a wine drinker, it may not be ultimately what it ultimately tastes like, or pair it with some food, pair it with some different environments, and really being much more patient with it is really what I would have done. Okay, this clock keeps changing on me, but I think I'm done. Okay, thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. It's a real treat to have Kara here with us. For me personally, because seeing all the hard work that SAIC put in to make some of these transformational moves, I know that it wasn't always easy, and I know that it took an incredible amount of time, but the transformation the organization went through is really inspiring, and it's wonderful to be able to bring her up here to share her learnings with all of you. And I know you'll be around to network a little bit after the event.